For the next few minutes, let's talk about thriving and sustainability. To introduce us to the topic, I'd like to think about the challenges to our Western lifestyle. What are the challenges that we face? Why am I doing this? My name's Allan Kennedy. I live outside of Etowah, Tennessee, and I was the only grandchild that was allowed in my grandfather's truck garden. So there was a lot of work that I picked up early on, but through all of that, I learned to love growing and plants and nature. I went on, got a bachelor's degree in medical technology, and then a master's degree in public health. So I approach growing a little bit differently. My angle is, I know how much hard work it is. I remember all that sweat when I was a kid. And I don't want to have to do any more of it than I have to. So what I want in growing is I want to grow the most stuff with the most nutrition at a reasonable cost in the least amount of time, because I'm not there to spend my life growing stuff. I just want to live and have good food. So if that helps you, that's part of why we're here and what we're going to talk about. I'd like to start by saying that this whole topic within the last probably 20 years has been studied and more information has come about. Colin Campbell from Cornell did the largest study of dietary intake, nutrition, and lifestyle in his book. It's outlined. The book's name is The China Study. Bernard Jensen also did a book entitled Empty Harvest. And what you begin to realize is the methods of production for food has left us with less and less and less nutrients in the harvest unless we choose to do something about. Arden Anderson wrote a book in the last few years entitled Real Medicine, Real Health, talking about food. And we're down to the point where if you have certain physical challenges, you can address those with certain foods. But frankly, you can't address those with just any food, because I would suggest to you, if you are eating food, quote unquote, rather than supplying your body with fuel, the typical Western diet largely supplies body cravings for nourishment and, could we say, minerals, with empty calories, primarily fat, salt, and sugars, which create the current challenges of sensitivities, obesity, and lifestyle diseases in epidemic proportions. It used to be that original diet that we used to have was comprised mostly of unprocessed food. Fruits, nuts, and grains originally. It was nutrient dense. Obviously, it was fresh. It was ripe. It came from mineralized soil, and there was by far genetic diversity. And then as meat and vegetables were added, the diet changed a little bit, but historically that has been the diet. And that sustained us. However, in the last 100 years, our diet has changed, especially in the Western world, to basically refined foods. In the name of shelf life, storage, from 80% of the population living in the country and 20% in town to 80% in the city and 20% in the country or less, shippability, repeat sales, and profit all have impacted the processing of our food. We have basically refined it. We have enriched it. Now, I have a problem when you take 26 or 7 things out and you put 3 or 4 things back in. I don't feel very enriched, but that's what we have. And by and large, our food now is generally genetically modified. We have herbicides, insecticides, and fungicides. There are various refining methods and materials that are used. Certain of them are chemicals that are used to extract certain things and process the food. We each, on average, eat 165 pounds of additives and coloring a year, some of which are of questionable food value or health benefit. And then there are the preservatives that are used to preserve food that would otherwise spoil. What we now have is that 60% of our food is processed and only 6% of our calories come to us as nutritionally whole. Our original diet, whole food, plant-based, antioxidants, complex carbohydrates, vitamins. The traditional diet then was basically 2/3 plants. The other third, animal-based, contained 2 times the fat and the protein. But the Western diet is still basically 1/3 animal-based and 2/3 processed, primarily fat, sugar, salt, and carbohydrates. And if you count the world's most popular vegetable, which is French fries, and I would suggest you can't count French fries as a vegetable because you take a potato that's 10% saturated fat and turn it into 51% saturated fat, and you put salt on it. If you discount that as a vegetable, we're only getting our nutrients out of 6% of our caloric intake. A lot of people will tell you that organic is a problem. A lot of people will tell you that, well, everything genetically modified is a problem. I'm not denying that, but the biggest problem is the processing of our food, and we need to think about it. There are environmental considerations. There is the recombinant bovine growth hormone that's given to cows to make them produce more milk. It's not necessarily good for us. In many areas it's banned. 80% of the antibiotics that are produced in the world are consumed by animals prophylactically so that they don't get sick on what they're being fed. Many of the foods that are grown are genetically modified. Corn, soy, sugar beets, the list goes on. Now, fortunately for us, there aren't nearly that number when it comes to gardening seeds. There are a few, and we can talk about those. And then there are the environmental considerations of animal products, be it blood, bone meal. Either one of them can contain the prions, which are thought to contaminate the soil and lead to mad cow's disease and other issues. If you're not careful, and we're talking about many of these are inputs, you can have heavy metal contamination. Oftentimes in agriculture we use gypsum, which is a good pH neutral source of calcium. However, you need to be careful of recycled gypsum because they're using fly ash, which from the coal-powered plants has heavy metal contamination, and when they make wallboard or sheetrock, those heavy metals go in that manufacturing process, and then if you get recycled sheetrock as your gypsum source, you have heavy metal contamination. All of our inputs we need to be careful of. The various chemicals, and we're going to be talking about biology that eat chemicals, radiation, hydrocarbons, and clean things up. And then there are the molds and aflatoxins and the radionuclides. The good news about all of this, there's ample provision that's been given us for the successful resolution of each one of these challenges if we're aware and if we do something about it. Chernobyl. It was a challenge. We're going to talk more about it. Fukushima Daiichi, environmental challenge. But you can see the flow of the radioactive pollution coming across the Pacific. Some of us understand the word biomagnification. And what I would like to do is focus on that for just a minute so we understand it. There are food chain concentrators, primarily in the animal kingdom. And for purposes of illustration, let's talk about the ocean. Let's talk about a plankton that has some radiation that is eaten by a small little swimmer, who's eaten by a small fish, who's eaten by a medium fish and then a bigger fish. Well, the radioactivity that that plankton has in it, every level magnifies about 1,000 times. So if you're not very careful, that from the plankton to the swimmer to the little fish, well, that's 2,000 times right there. And then you go up another, you're up 4,000 or 5,000 times the concentration of radioactivity. And so you need to understand that if you want pollution, you can eat a Great Lake, half a pound of Great Lakes fish, or drink Great Lakes water for a year. You'll get the same amount of pollution through biomagnification. So that's an area that we need to be careful of. Chemicals and radiation are primarily stored in body fat. That means those of us who are skinny have less chemicals and radiation in our body. So that's well, yeah, maybe I need to go on a diet. And 95 to 99% of dietary chemicals are from animal products that are consumed. So if you don't consume animal products, you have a lot less load of chemicals. There are approximately 70,000 pests and diseases, which now consume half of the world's crops every year. Despite the use of $35 billion worth of pesticides and chemicals. Pesticide use increased 404 million pounds between 1996 and 2011 without significant yield increase. We're told that the yields will be better. We need to do this to feed the planet, but it's not happening. The challenge that I really find when I went to get my North Carolina pesticide applicator's permit, even though I had all this education, I did not realize that most of the chemicals that we were applying, many of them were systemic neurotoxins, which are frontal lobe and endocrine system active. They mess up our life and they mess up our thinking. And if we're not careful, I would suggest that they will interfere with our thinking so we can't make the appropriate life decisions that we need to make. Well, what do? What do we eat? Well, there's a list. The Environmental Working Group has a list for 2015, the Dirty Dozen list. Now, let me explain these two lists. These are the foods that you need to buy organic if you can afford it. Apples, strawberries, spinach, cherry tomatoes, hot peppers, grapes, sweet bell peppers, snap peas, kale, collards, nectarines, celery, cucumbers, and potatoes. By the way, the average normal potato, commercial potato, has 5, 6, 7 chemical sprays on it before it comes to you. 7 on the potato. And that's why they suggest that if at all possible, you should buy organic. And then there's the list, the Clean 15. If you really don't have the ability to buy organic, there are some things that are pretty much clean in their production. And here's the list: avocados, cabbage, mangoes, eggplant, cauliflower, sweet corn. I'm getting hungry already. Sweet peas, especially frozen, papayas, grapefruit, sweet potatoes, pineapple, asparagus, kiwi, and cantaloupe. So, those are the ones to eat if you don't have money for organic, and you need to avoid the other ones if you're not going to get them organic. Well, how do we rank our food according to nutrient density? What food has the most nutrients per calorie in it anyway? Well, there is what is known as the Aggregate Nutrient Density Index, the ANDI score. The foods are ranked according to their ratio. And just recently, to kale and collards, which rank 1,000 on the ANDI score, that's the max, was added watercress. Well, I like watercress until it gets a little bit older, then it can be kind of tangy. But you can notice from the list, spinach is 739, so it's on down the ways. Swiss chard, 670. Romaine lettuce, we eat a lot of lettuce sometimes, 389. Broccoli, 376. And then you get down there to blueberries, 130. Iceberg lettuce, 110. Orange, 109. And lentils, 100. So we need to be careful. It's very interesting to me that those things that are high in nutrient density, we can grow through the winter. And they're greens. Now, I'll have to admit to you, my taste is a little bit distorted. Some of those greens I might not like as much of. But if I really want to get over something, maybe I need to get over it. And maybe I need to find a recipe or find a smoothie that I can put those greens in and it won't hit me so hard, and it will be more enjoyable, and I'll get more greens inside of me. Well, let's talk for a minute about genetically modified corn, because it's hard for me to figure out whether the genetic modification, where there's all these gene fragments and all this other stuff as well as corn, is worse for me, or the glyphosate is worse for me. Glyphosate is the active ingredient in Roundup, and we know how it kills weeds. It chelates the minerals in the weeds, ties them up so the plant doesn't have that mineral, and it dies. Well, what's the deal? Well, you can begin to see with calcium in genetically modified corn at 14 parts per million, and non-GM corn 6,130 parts per million, magnesium 2 parts per million, non-GM corn 113 parts, Manganese, 2 parts, 14 parts per million. You can see that it's chelating the minerals in the corn, tying those minerals up. Not only that, but GMO corn was found to contain 13 parts per million of glyphosate, compared to 0 in non-GM corn. At 13 parts per million, the GMO corn contains more than 18 times the safe level of glyphosate set by the EPA. Now, they have just upped that, so there's a higher level, but still it doesn't make me feel a whole lot safer. Glyphosate also kills off the beneficial bacteria that might keep pathogens in check, both in the soil and in the guts of the animals that consume it. So, we can talk more about that, but basically what you have is Clostridium difficile is a pathogen, and it can take over if we don't have the proper gut bacteria, and that's what people get sick and are in the hospital for. So the glyphosate, it's actually systemic. You can wash all you want to. You can wash the skin off the apple and it still will have it. And it contains extremely high levels of formaldehyde. So the question begs, are we smarter than the animals? Because you see, this farmer decided he would test, and he put GMO corn and organic corn. And the squirrels came, and the GMO corn's still pretty much there. And the organic corn's almost gone. So the question is, are we smarter than the animals? Sometimes we are, and sometimes we're not. We do know that as the minerals go down, looking at heart conditions, chronic bronchitis, asthma, tinnitus, and bone deformities, as those minerals go down, the diseases go up. And we know those minerals that are associated with those diseases. You'll notice that on this chart, and this is a very graphic chart to me because in the white area, it goes to about 1927 or 28. And then it's pretty much constant. All the minerals are about the same. And then when we began mechanical farming, the minerals began to go south. Then in 1948 or so, when we began using, why 1948? World War II was over. The production for bombs was at a standstill, and so they had to do something with all this production for ammonium nitrate. They said, hey, we could use it as fertilizer. And so you'll notice that the minerals began to go down even further. And then in the 1960, when we took those neurotoxins and began to apply them to bugs in the form of pesticides, herbicides, and fungicide, the minerals went down even more. And you can notice over on the right-hand side of the screen, when we introduced in the mid-90s glyphosate and GM crops, cancer took off, and the graphs aren't level, they aren't downward. The disease graphs go out through the stratosphere. By the time the average child in a developed country turns 8 years of age, they've had more sugar in their lives than the average person did in their entire lifetime just 1 century ago. The problem is not that we are eating food anymore. We're eating food-like products. And if you don't believe it, go to the store and look. It's not hard. It's a real easy diet. If it has a label, it's not on your diet. No problem. So the question is, down at the bottom is junk food. There's processed food and canned food. Now, generally, when Weston Price studied the various populations, he found that all of the populations, the native populations, had 4 times the needed nutrients. But then as we have poorly mineralized and growing hot and we don't process it well and we cook our food, we burn off many of those nutrients. And then if we dehydrate or ferment, and we will talk about both of those, and we eat raw, ripe, mineralized heirloom produce, we may get 400 to 582 times the nutrients. And then there are sprouts and pollen and pre-digested food. We're going to talk about those. We can get up to 50 times the nutrients if we eat the right foods. But I'm suggesting that we eat nutrient-dense, high-ormus, probiotic, antioxidant superfoods. And that's what we're going to be talking about. How do we do this? So the question is, which do you choose? Do you want sick care or health care? There's a cost to each. If you don't choose the health care, you will choose by default sick care. How do we boost our immune system? How do we bust it? Well, lack of exercise is one way to hurt our immune system. Being overweight, eating foods high in sugar and fat, experiencing constant stress, being socially isolated. Well, how do we boost it? Regular exercise, get more antioxidants in our diet, get adequate sleep, practice relaxation techniques, and I like the last one, that's laugh. It does us good. So, here are 12 strategies to strengthen your immune system. Eat like Peter Rabbit, stress less, move your body, sleep soundly, socialize more, make more love, shun tobacco, smoke, consume friendly bacteria, expose yourself to sunshine, fresh air, and friends, choose vitamin and mineral supplements wisely, immunize yourself. Now, the recent information about getting immunity is eat more dirt. So be careful of immunizing yourself and familiarize yourself with immune-enhancing herbs. I have a lot of friends that farm with horses. They don't have any electricity. They live very naturally, as we used to live back in the 1800s. I got to know them quite well because I was buying vegetables from them. And finally, after a couple or 3 years, I asked one of the fellows, how many people live in this community? Well, about 350. And then I asked him, well, how many cases of cancer have you had in your community? It was about 10 years old. And he thought, and he thought, and he thought some more, and he said, you know, I don't know that anybody's had cancer. Well, what I would suggest to you is that if you're careful by your choices, you can escape 90 to 95% of the diseases that are out there because they're lifestyle diseases, and you need to make that choice. So what applications are we going to make? take responsibility for your own life and your own lifestyle. You may go to the doctor, and that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But understand that that doctor is not nearly as interested in your health as you are. Become a knowledgeable consumer. Vote with your dollars. Buy fresher, organic, garden. Make a personal decision, quality of life, because you're going to pay now or pay later, and just do it. Whatever you do, my advice is to choose optimal health.